The letter from Dr. Gonzalez arrived on a Tuesday morning. I'd been ignoring the pain in my hip for weeks, convincing myself it was just the usual aches of aging. At 72, your body has a way of protesting even the simplest movements. But deep down, I knew this was different. Mrs. Wilson, the letter began formally, though Patricia had been my doctor for over a decade. Your test results indicate a condition requiring immediate intervention. I sat heavily at my kitchen table, the same oak table where I'd served thousands of family meals, where Robert had done his homework as a boy, where my grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, now sat for the Sunday dinners I still prepared every week, despite Robert and Diane's protests that it was too much trouble for me. Too much trouble. The phrase echoed in my mind as I stared at the clinical language detailing the surgery I would need. 6 to 8 weeks of recovery, limited mobility, home care recommended. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I hadn't always been the family caretaker. There was a time when I had my own career as a librarian, my own interests, my own life that didn't revolve around making things easier for my son and his family. But after Michael passed away 5 years ago, something shifted. Perhaps it was my fear of being alone, or maybe it was seeing how overwhelmed Robert and Diane seemed with their demanding careers and growing children. It started small, offering to pick up the kids from school a few days a week, dropping off homemade meals when I knew they were especially busy. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, I became essential to their household's functioning. 3 days a week became 5. Occasional meals became daily dinner preparation. Helping with homework became managing the children's entire after-school schedules. Their laundry, their doctor appointments, their school projects, all became my responsibility. "Mom's got it," Robert would say with casual confidence whenever Diane mentioned a schedule conflict or forgotten errand. And I did have it. I always had it. For years, I'd been the invisible support system that allowed their lives to run smoothly, the unacknowledged foundation upon which they built their success. I never minded, not really. I loved my grandchildren fiercely, and being needed gave purpose to my days after Michael's death left me adrift. But sometimes, in quiet moments when the house was finally still, I wondered if I'd made a mistake in allowing them to become so dependent on my labor while simultaneously taking it for granted. Now, facing a surgery and lengthy recovery, I would discover exactly where I stood in the family I'd given everything to maintain. I waited until Sunday dinner to tell them. I'd prepared Robert's favorite pot roast, though standing at the stove had been excruciating with my deteriorating hip. The dining room was filled with the comfortable chaos of family, Emma showing Diane something on her phone, Tyler arguing good-naturedly with his father about baseball statistics, the familiar symphony of clinking silverware and overlapping conversations. "I need to tell you all something," I said during a rare moment of quiet. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of attention. "I've been having some health issues. Dr. Gonzalez says I need hip replacement surgery. It's scheduled for next week." The reactions were immediate and exactly as I'd anticipated. Concern from the children, practical questions from Diane about the procedure itself, and from Robert, a furrowed brow that spoke of inconvenience more than worry. "Recovery is 6 to 8 weeks, I continued, watching my son's expression carefully. "I won't be able to drive or manage stairs easily. I'll need some help." "Well, of course we'll figure something out," Diane said, already reaching for her phone. "There are excellent home health services. Our insurance through the university might even cover some of it." Not once did anyone suggest the obvious, that I might come stay with them during my recovery in their spacious lakeside estates home with the guest room on the first floor. The home with plenty of space, where I'd painted the kitchen while they were on vacation last year, where I'd planted the garden that provided the vegetables we were eating right now. "I was thinking," I began, But Robert cut me off. "Mom, don't worry about any of this. We'll take care of everything." Diane's right. Professional care is the way to go. You need someone with proper training. But what about the kids' schedules? Your dinners? The household? "We'll manage," Diane said with a dismissive wave. "We've been meaning to try that meal delivery service everyone at work raves about, and Emma's old enough to help more around the house." Emma, who had never so much as loaded the dishwasher under their roof, looked up from her phone with alarm. "But I have volleyball every day after school." "And I've got baseball," Tyler added quickly. "See?" I said quietly. "You need me." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Robert cleared his throat. "What we need," he said carefully, "is for you to focus on getting better. Let us handle the logistics." The logistics. That's what my years of caregiving had been reduced to. A problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed. Not once did anyone acknowledge the irony that after years of cooking their meals, cleaning their home, and raising their children, I was being outsourced the moment I needed care myself. Dr. Gonzalez had warned me that emotional stress could complicate recovery. As I watched my family quickly move on to discussing an upcoming school fundraiser, I felt a heaviness that had nothing to do with my deteriorating joint. For the first time, I saw with perfect clarity exactly where I stood. Not as a beloved mother and grandmother, but as a convenient service provider whose value lasted only as long as my utility. The surgery went smoothly, though waking up alone in the recovery room brought an ache no medication could touch. Robert had dropped me off that morning, explaining apologetically that he had an important presentation he couldn't miss. Diane was coordinating a conference at the university. The children were in school, of course. "Is someone coming to take you home, Mrs. Wilson?" the discharge nurse asked, her kind eyes taking in my solitary state. "My son will be here soon," I lied, then called a taxi service from my room phone. The first few days at home were a blur of pain medication and fitful sleep. Helen Martinez from next door checked on me daily, bringing simple meals and genuine concern. "Margaret, this isn't right," she said on the third day, finding me struggling to reach my medication on the nightstand. "Where is your family?" As if summoned by her question, the doorbell rang. Robert stood on the porch, looking harried, but professional in his business attire. Behind him was a middle-aged woman in scrubs. "Mom, this is Nurse Taylor," he announced, stepping inside without offering a hug or asking how I was feeling. "She'll be coming by 4 hours a day, 3 days a week." The service had excellent reviews online. Nurse Taylor seemed competent and kind, but as she efficiently checked my vitals and reviewed my medication schedule, I couldn't help but notice how Robert stayed near the door, keys in hand, clearly eager to leave. "I thought maybe the kids might want to visit this weekend," I suggested as he prepared to depart. "They could bring their homework, watch a movie with me." "They've got activities all weekend," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Emma's volleyball tournament and Tyler's science project is due Monday, but I'm sure they'll FaceTime you." After he left, Nurse Taylor helped me to the bathroom, her professional demeanor slipping just enough to reveal her thoughts. "Family's complicated these days," she offered diplomatically. "Everyone's so busy." "Yes," I agreed, thinking of the countless hours I'd spent driving Emma to volleyball practices, helping Tyler with science projects. Everyone's very busy. That evening, alone in the house that had never felt so empty, I began to take stock, not just of my physical condition, but of the relationships I'd spent a lifetime nurturing. The family photographs lining my hallway seemed to mock me now. Smiling faces at graduations, holidays, vacations. Moments where we appeared to be a loving, connected family, but appearances, I was learning, could be profoundly deceptive. I reached for the journal Michael had given me on our 40th anniversary, its leather cover worn smooth from years of use. I'd always found clarity through writing, processing, my thoughts on paper when they became too tangled in my mind. Tonight, I needed that clarity more than ever. "Today, I learned the difference," I wrote, my handwriting shaky from medication and emotion, "between being needed and being valued. For years, I've confused the two, believing that making myself indispensable to Robert and his family would ensure I remained important to them. I see now that I was merely convenient, a free service easily replaced when no longer functioning optimally." The words were painful to write, but with each sentence, my vision seemed to sharpen. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I continued writing late into the night, documenting not just my disappointment, but the decades of family history that had led to this moment. The patterns established, the expectations formed, the boundaries never set. Near dawn, exhausted but somehow lighter, I made a decision. If my family viewed me as a service rather than a person with needs and feelings of her own, perhaps it was time to reconsider the relationship entirely, including the financial aspects. I'd never before linked to their treatment of me. When William Curtis, my attorney, arrived 3 days later for what Robert assumed was a simple review of my advance directive, I was ready. William had been handling my affairs since Michael's death, and I trusted him completely. "Are you certain about this, Margaret?" he asked, after I outlined the changes I wanted to my will. "It's quite a significant alteration." "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied, thinking of the silent house, the occasional rushed visits from Robert, the way the grandchildren had indeed FaceTimed. Once, for less than 3 minutes, clearly prompted by their mother. The changes weren't spiteful, but they were substantial. The lake cabin that Robert had always assumed would be his would now go to my niece Sarah, who, despite our past differences, had called twice from Arizona to check on me since the surgery. The bulk of my estate, including the proceeds from the eventual sale of my home, would be divided between a scholarship fund at the library where I'd worked for 30 years and the Riverview Charitable Foundation, which supported elderly residents without family support. Robert and his family wouldn't be left nothing. I wasn't cruel. But their inheritance would be significantly reduced. The automatic transfer of wealth they'd counted on redirected toward people and causes that demonstrated the values I'd tried unsuccessfully to instill in my son: compassion, reciprocity, and the understanding that family meant showing up, not just in moments of convenience, but especially in times of need. "They won't be happy," William cautioned as I signed the documents. "No," I agreed. "They won't, but perhaps they'll be enlightened." I didn't tell Robert about the changes immediately. Instead, I watched and waited during my recovery, giving him and his family every opportunity to prove my assessment wrong. Perhaps my medication had made me overly sensitive. Perhaps the isolation of recovery had darkened my perspective. Perhaps they would surprise me. But as the weeks passed, the pattern held firm. Nurse Taylor became my primary human contact. Helen brought meals and genuine conversation. My old colleagues from the library organized a schedule to visit and drive me to follow-up appointments. My physical health improved steadily under the care of professionals and friends. My family remained largely absent, apart from obligation-driven Sunday visits that grew shorter each week. Twice, they canceled entirely. The meals I'd prepared for years, the schedules I'd maintained, the support I'd provided, all were forgotten, now that I couldn't provide them. They had adapted to my absence with remarkable speed, proving just how little my presence had actually meant beyond the services I provided. 6 weeks after surgery, I was finally cleared to drive short distances. My first trip was to William's office, where I finalized the changes to my will and signed the documents transferring ownership of Michael's treasured pocket watch collection to Sarah's son, who had written me a thoughtful letter during my recovery. "Do you want me to speak with Robert?" William asked as we concluded our business. "No," I said, surprised by the calm certainty in my voice. "This isn't about punishment or creating family drama. It's about aligning my legacy with my values. I'll tell him when the time is right. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself at the oak table that had witnessed so much family history, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations, hurt feelings, perhaps even lasting damage to relationships already revealed as more fragile than I'd believed. But for the first time in years, I was living according to my own needs and values, not contorting myself to fill the gaps in others' lives. I had spent decades putting my family first, believing that sacrifice was the highest form of love. Now I understood that true love, for oneself and others, required balance, reciprocity, and sometimes painful honesty. The weeks of recovery revealed patterns I'd been blind to for years. I observed my family from a new perspective, no longer as the ever-accommodating mother and grandmother, but as someone suddenly standing outside the circle looking in. What I saw broke my heart, but strengthened my resolve. Robert called on Thursday evening, his voice carrying that particular tone of distracted attention I'd come to recognize, the one that meant he was simultaneously checking emails on his computer. "How are you feeling, Mom? Nurse Taylor says you're making excellent progress." At least he'd been in contact with the nurse. I shifted in my armchair, testing the range of motion in my new hip. "Much better. Dr. Gonzalez says I'm ahead of schedule. I might not need the full 8 weeks of recovery after all." "That's great news," he replied, the faint clicking of his keyboard audible in the background. "So you'll be back to normal soon?" Normal. The word hung in the air between us, laden with unspoken expectations. Normal meant me resuming my role as the family's support system. Normal meant Sunday dinners and after-school pickups and folded laundry appearing magically in their dresser drawers. "I'm not sure what normal looks like now, Robert," I said carefully. "At my age, after surgery like this, it's important to make some adjustments." The keyboard clicking stopped. "What kind of adjustments?" "I'm thinking I should focus on regaining my strength before taking on too much. Dr. Gonzalez suggested I consider my limitations more carefully." A weighted silence followed. I could almost see him processing this information, calculating the inconvenience, recalibrating his expectations. "Of course," he finally said, his voice overly understanding. "Your health comes first. Diane and I were just saying we should probably look into a more permanent solution for the kids' after-school situation anyway. Emma's activities are getting more serious, and Tyler needs more structure with his homework than we can provide with our schedules." I closed my eyes, absorbing the swift pivot from concern to solution, the ease with which I was being removed from the equation now that I'd suggested I might not resume my previous role. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You and Diane are capable people." After we hung up, I made my way carefully to the kitchen, one hand on my walker. The refrigerator door was covered with photographs held by mismatched magnets, snapshots of Emma and Tyler from infancy through their current gangly adolescence, school portraits, vacation photos, candid moments at birthday parties and holiday gatherings. In almost every one, I was behind the camera rather than in the frame. Even in documentation of family history, I had been the facilitator rather than a participant. How had I not seen this pattern until now? The next morning, Helen came by with fresh cinnamon rolls and coffee. Her presence had been one of the unexpected blessings of my recovery, the rekindling of a neighborhood friendship that had faded as my involvement with Robert's family intensified. "You seem different today," she observed, settling into a chair across from me at the kitchen table. "More resigned?" I offered. I was going to say resolved. "There's a clarity about you." I spread a napkin on my lap, buying time to organize my thoughts. I've been doing a lot of thinking about family obligations, about giving and receiving, about what we teach people to expect from us. Helen nodded, understanding immediately in the way that women of our generation often do. We had both been raised on ideals of maternal sacrifice, had both constructed our identities around being needed by others. Robert called last night, I continued. He wanted to know when I'd be back to normal, by which he meant back to being his unpaid household manager and childcare provider. "And what did you tell him?" Helen asked, breaking a cinnamon roll in half and pushing part toward me. "That I need to focus on my recovery, that things might need to change." I paused, running my finger along the edge of my coffee cup. But I didn't tell him about the will yet. I'm not ready for that conversation. Helen had been the first person I'd confided in about my decision to redirect my estate. Instead of the shock I'd half expected, she had nodded with immediate understanding. Her own children lived across the country, calling dutifully on holidays but otherwise absent from her daily life. "You don't owe them an explanation yet," she said now. "Or ever, really. Your estate is yours to direct as you see fit." "It's not about the money," I said, realizing as the words left my mouth how true they were. "It's about finally acknowledging what this relationship has become, what I allowed it to become." Later that afternoon, as I was dozing in my recliner, the front door opened with the familiar sound of Robert's key in the lock. I'd given him that key years ago for emergencies, but he'd come to use it with the casual entitlement of someone entering an extension of their own home rather than someone else's private space. "Mom?" he called from the entryway. "You decent? I brought the kids to see you." I adjusted my robe and straightened in the chair, pleasure at seeing my grandchildren, warring with irritation at the unannounced visit. "In the living room," I called back. Emma and Tyler appeared first, each carrying what looked suspiciously like containers of homework. Behind them, Robert was checking his watch. "I've got that meeting across town," he explained hurriedly. "I thought maybe the kids could hang out here until dinner time. Emma has volleyball at 7, but Diane can pick them up before that. There's nothing in the fridge at home, and they have all this homework." The familiar script unfolded exactly as it had hundreds of times before my surgery. Robert, faced with a logistical challenge in his carefully balanced life, defaulting to the easiest solution: "Mom will handle it." Except this time, I wasn't physically capable of handling it. I couldn't drive them to volleyball. I couldn't prepare dinner. I couldn't even easily get up to help with homework questions without the walker I now depended on. "Robert," I said, quietly, conscious of the children's presence, "I'm not able to watch them today. I'm still recovering, remember? I need rest, and I can't properly supervise or help with transportation." His expression flickered from confusion to disbelief, to something approaching panic. "But it's just for a few hours. They can be quiet. They can help you if you need anything." I looked at my grandchildren, who were already sprawling across my living room furniture, devices in hand, oblivious to the tension building between their father and me. "That's not fair to them or to me," I said firmly. "They need proper supervision, and I need to follow my recovery plan. You should have called first to check if this would work." Robert's face flushed. For a moment, I thought he might actually argue, might actually insist that his convenience outweighed my medical needs. Instead, he sighed dramatically. "Fine. Come on, kids. Grandma's not feeling up to company today. We'll figure something else out." The swift packing up, the pointed sighs, the muttered comments just loud enough for me to hear. "I thought she'd be happy to see you guys," and "must be the pain medication making her cranky," were designed to make me feel guilty, to make me reconsider. In the past, such tactics would have worked. I would have capitulated, would have ignored my own needs to accommodate theirs, would have found a way to make it work despite my limitations. Today, I simply watched them leave, the door closing behind them with unnecessary force. The house felt both emptier and somehow freer after they departed. I made my way carefully to the kitchen, put on the kettle for tea, and then called Sarah, my niece in Arizona. Our relationship had been complicated over the years, strained by old family dynamics and geographical distance. The daughter of my late brother, Sarah, had always felt I favored Robert, that the family resources and attention flowed disproportionately to my son and his children. There had been some truth to this, I realized now. I had prioritized Robert's family, had directed not just my time and energy, but also financial support their way, assuming this investment would be reciprocated when needed. How ironic that Sarah, the family member I had inadvertently sidelined, was now the one checking in regularly during my recovery. "Aunt Margaret," she answered warmly, "I was just thinking about you. How's the hip?" We spoke for nearly an hour, covering everything from my recovery progress to her son's college applications, to her memories of summers at the lake cabin with my brother. Not once did she rush me or hint at other obligations waiting. Not once did I feel like an imposition on her time. "I've been thinking about the cabin," I said toward the end of our call, "about how it should stay in the family, be enjoyed by people who appreciate its history." "Those summers meant everything to Dad," Sarah said, her voice softening with memory. "Some of my best childhood moments happened on that dock." "Mine too," I agreed, remembering Michael teaching Robert to fish, the way the sunset turned the water to gold, the simple pleasures of board games by lantern light. I didn't tell her about my decision regarding the cabin. That would come later, when all the legal details were finalized. But the conversation cemented my conviction that I was making the right choice. The cabin should go to someone who valued its emotional significance, not someone who saw it primarily as a real estate investment, as Robert increasingly did. The following weekend brought another Sunday dinner, a tradition that had somehow persisted despite my surgery, though in radically altered form. Instead of me preparing a multi-course meal in my kitchen, Diane had grudgingly organized takeout to be delivered to my house, their version of caretaking. "We brought Italian," Robert announced as they filed in, bearing plastic bags of packaged food from that place on Harper Street. Not my favorite, which they would have known had they ever paid attention to my preferences rather than projecting their own onto me. But I smiled and thanked them, determined to keep the peace during what I expected to be a tense meal. We ate from takeout containers at my dining room table, the conversation dominated by Emma's volleyball tournaments and Tyler's upcoming science fair. Neither child asked how I was feeling. Diane mentioned a colleague's mother who had bounced back remarkably quickly from hip surgery, the comparison pointed and unmistakable. "Dr. Gonzalez is very pleased with my progress," I said mildly. "Everyone recovers differently." "Speaking of recovery," Robert interjected, setting down his plastic fork, "we need to discuss the schedule moving forward. Nurse Taylor says you're becoming much more independent, so we're thinking we might reduce her hours to twice a week instead of 3. I nodded slowly. "I am managing better on my own." "Great." He seemed relieved by my easy agreement. "And since you're doing so well, we were hoping you might be up for having the kids here after school again starting next week. Not for you? To drive them anywhere yet," he added hastily, as if this were a generous concession. "Just for them to have a place to go until we can pick them up after work. The after-school program at the community center is ridiculously expensive, and frankly, they'd rather be here with you." I set down my own fork, taking a moment to study my son's face. The expectant look, the assumption of agreement, the complete lack of awareness that he was once again positioning me as a service provider rather than a family member with needs of her own. "Robert," I said carefully, "I don't think that will work right now. I'm still using a walker most of the time. I get tired very easily. I can't properly supervise active teenagers or help them with their schoolwork while I'm focusing on my own recovery." His expression clouded. "But you just said you're managing better on your own." "Managing my own basic needs, yes. Not taking on childcare responsibilities." Diane jumped in, her tone conciliatory but her words revealing. We understand you need more time, Margaret. We're just trying to find solutions that work for everyone. The kids miss their routine with you. Their routine, not their grandmother. Their routine. The distinction spoke volumes. I miss them too, I said truthfully. But right now, I need to prioritize getting stronger. Maybe in another month we can revisit the after-school question? A heavy silence fell over the table. Emma and Tyler exchanged glances, clearly sensing the tension, but mercifully staying quiet. Robert pushed a piece of ravioli around his container before speaking again. Mom, can I ask you something directly? His tone had shifted to the one he used for difficult client meetings. Are you upset with us? Because it feels like you're being deliberately unaccommodating. The irony of his accusation was so profound that I nearly laughed. I, who had accommodated their every need for years, was now unaccommodating for prioritizing my health during recovery from major surgery. I'm not upset, I replied, keeping my voice even. I'm being realistic about my capabilities right now, and perhaps I'm reassessing what's reasonable to expect from each other as family members. Meaning what exactly? Diane asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. I looked around the table at their faces. My son, impatient and entitled. His wife, calculating and defensive. My grandchildren, increasingly uncomfortable and eager to escape this adult conflict. A profound sadness washed over me, not just for myself, but for all of us, and the relationship we had constructed that served none of us well in the end. Meaning that family relationships should be reciprocal, I said finally. For years, I've structured my entire life around supporting your family's needs. I've been happy to do it because I love you all. But when I needed support in return, not just hiring a nurse but actual presence and care, it became clear that our understanding of family obligation is very different. Robert's face flushed dark red. That's completely unfair. We've been incredibly supportive. We hired the best home health care we could find. We're here every Sunday. We call regularly. You hired someone to do what was inconvenient for you to do yourselves, I corrected gently. And I appreciate Nurse Taylor. She's wonderful, but professional care isn't the same as family care, and you know it. So what do you want from us? He demanded, abandoning any pretense of casual conversation. We have jobs, Mom. The kids have activities. We can't put our entire lives on hold because you're recovering from surgery. I never asked you to put your lives on hold, I said quietly. Just as you never asked me to put mine on hold all these years as I picked up your children, prepared your meals, handled your household tasks, and generally filled all the gaps in your busy lives. The silence that followed my words was deafening. Emma and Tyler stared at their takeout containers, suddenly fascinated by the remains of their pasta. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting toward Robert as if waiting for his lead on how to respond. Robert himself seemed genuinely shocked, as if the possibility that I might have my own perspective on our family dynamic had never occurred to him. I think, I continued into that silence, my voice steadier than I'd expected, that we've fallen into patterns that aren't healthy for any of us. I've enabled dependency by always being available, and you've come to see my time and energy as resources you're entitled to rather than gifts freely given. That's ridiculous, Robert finally managed, though his voice lacked conviction. We appreciate everything you do. Appreciation isn't the same as reciprocity, I said. When's the last time you asked what I needed? What would make my life easier? What dreams I might still have at 72 that don't revolve around being your children's caretaker? Tyler, always the more sensitive of my grandchildren, looked up with an expression that broke my heart, genuine confusion, as if the concept of his grandmother having needs or dreams independent of their family had never been presented to him. Do you have dreams, Grandma? He asked softly. The innocent question pierced the tension. For a moment, I saw myself through my grandson's eyes, not as a woman with her own rich interior life and unfulfilled wishes, but as a supporting character in his story, defined entirely by her relationship to his family. "I do, sweetheart," I answered, smiling at him despite the ache in my chest. "I always wanted to take a photography class, to visit the Grand Canyon, to join a book club where we discuss something besides children's reading assignments." I paused, looking directly at Robert. To know that the people I've devoted my life to would show up for me when I needed them, not just when it was convenient. Diane cleared her throat. "I think we should go," she said, already reaching for her purse. "Margaret clearly needs rest, and we've imposed enough for one evening." The swift pivot to martyrdom was so predictable I almost smiled. Genuine emotional honesty met with immediate retreat, the Wilson family specialty, cultivated to perfection. Over decades. "Yes," I agreed, making no effort to dissuade them. "I am tired. Thank you for dinner." They packed up with remarkable efficiency, the children hugging me with awkward obligation before filing out. Robert lingered in the doorway after Diane and the kids had gone to the car. "Mom," he began, his expression torn between defensiveness and genuine concern. "I don't understand where all this is coming from. If you needed more help, you could have just asked." The statement was so revealing in its blindness that it momentarily stunned me. After years of anticipating and fulfilling their needs without being asked, the suggestion that I should have explicitly requested basic compassion during a health crisis was breathtaking in its lack of self-awareness. "That's not how family works, Robert," I said finally. "At least, it's not how it should work. Love means seeing needs and meeting them without being asked. Something I've done for you and your family for years. Something I'd hoped might be reciprocated when I was vulnerable." He shifted uncomfortably, keys jingling in his hand. "You're making this into something bigger than it is. We're all just doing our best here." "Perhaps," I conceded, "but your best and my best seem to involve very different levels of sacrifice and consideration." After they left, I sat alone at the dining table, surrounded by half-empty takeout, containers and the echoes of a conversation long overdue. There was a strange relief in having finally spoken some of the truths I'd been carrying, even if they weren't fully heard or acknowledged. The next morning brought cloudy skies and a call from William Curtis, my attorney. "The paperwork is finalized, Margaret," he said without preamble. "The changes to your will are officially recorded. Do you want me to send copies to Robert now, or would you prefer to tell him yourself first?" I watched raindrops trace patterns down my kitchen window, considering the question. "I'll tell him," I decided. "But not quite yet. Let's give the dust a chance to settle from yesterday's conversation." William's tone was professionally neutral, but tinged with concern. "Just remember, the longer you wait, the more potential for accusations that you weren't of sound mind when you made these changes, especially given your recent surgery and medication." "I understand the risk," I acknowledged. "But this isn't a decision I made lightly or impulsively. I've been thinking about it for years, if I'm honest with myself. The surgery just brought everything into sharper focus." After hanging up, I made my way to the small spare bedroom that had once been Robert's and was now my modest home office. From the filing cabinet, I retrieved a folder labeled Financial Records and spread its contents across the desk. The documentation of my generosity over the years was meticulously kept, a habit from my days managing the library's acquisition budget. Checks written to help with Emma's private volleyball coaching and Tyler's space camp. The substantial contribution toward Robert and Diane's down payment on their Lakeside Estates home, the college funds I'd established for both grandchildren faithfully contributed to each month despite my fixed income, all given freely, with love and without expectation of repayment. But perhaps that had been my mistake, allowing financial support to flow only one way, reinforcing the pattern of me giving and them taking as the natural order of our relationship. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Helen stood on the porch, holding a casserole dish and looking concerned. "I saw the family leave rather abruptly last night," she said as I welcomed her in. "Thought you might need some company and a proper meal today." Her simple kindness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The conversation didn't go quite as I'd hoped, I admitted, leading her to the kitchen. While we ate Helen's chicken pot pie, made with vegetables from her garden and infinitely better than last night's takeout, I recounted the tense family dinner. Helen listened without interruption, nodding occasionally in recognition of dynamics she'd observed from a distance for years. "It's a difficult road you're on," she said when I finished. "Changing established family patterns is like trying to redirect a river that's been flowing the same way for decades. There's going to be resistance." "I know," I sighed. "Part of me wonders if I've left it too late, if we're all too set in our roles to create something healthier now." Helen considered this as she served us both second helpings. "It's never too late to set boundaries, Margaret. Too late for an ideal outcome, perhaps, but not too late for a better one than where you were headed." Later that afternoon, Nurse Taylor arrived for her scheduled visit. As she checked my incision and guided me through my rehabilitation exercises, her professional demeanor softened into something more personal. "You seem different today, Mrs. Wilson. More present. How are you feeling emotionally?" I was surprised by the question. Nurse Taylor had always been kind but professionally distant, focused on my physical progress rather than my mental state. "I had a difficult conversation with my family yesterday," I admitted, "about expectations and reciprocity. It didn't go particularly well." She nodded, helping me stretch my healing hip with gentle pressure. Family dynamics are often the most challenging part of recovery for my older patients. The physical healing follows a predictable pattern, but the relationship adjustments, those can be much more painful. "Have you seen this before?" I asked, curious about her perspective as someone who moved through many family situations in her work. "More often than you might think," she said, her expression thoughtful. "There's something about illness or injury that reveals the true nature of relationships. Some families rise beautifully to the occasion, rearranging their entire lives to provide care. Others," she trailed off diplomatically, "others hire professionals and consider their obligation fulfilled," I finished for her. She didn't confirm or deny, but her slight smile acknowledged the truth in my assessment. "What matters most is how you respond to that reality, Mrs. Wilson. Some of my patients accept it with resignation. Others use it as valuable information about where they stand and adjust their lives accordingly." "I'm trying for the latter," I said. "I can tell," she replied, helping me back into my recliner. "And for what it's worth, I think that's the healthier choice, even if it's the harder one." After Nurse Taylor left, I found myself contemplating her words about illness revealing the true nature of relationships. My surgery had indeed acted as a kind of truth serum for my family dynamics, bringing to the surface patterns that had been evident but ignored for years. I was just making a cup of tea when my phone rang. I expected Robert, perhaps calling to continue our conversation from last night, or more likely to pretend it hadn't happened. Instead, I was surprised to see Emma's name on the caller ID. "Grandma?" Her voice sounded smaller than her 14 years, uncertain in a way I rarely heard from my confident granddaughter. "Are you mad at us?" The question caught me off guard. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at all. Why do you ask?" "Because of what you said last night, about us not helping you enough. And Dad seemed really upset on the drive home. He and Mom were talking in that quiet way they do when they don't want us to hear, but I could tell they were arguing about you." I sank into a kitchen chair, weighing my words carefully. I had no desire to put my grandchildren in the middle of adult conflicts, but I also wouldn't lie to them or pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "I'm not mad," I repeated. "I'm sad. There's a difference. I'm sad that when I needed help, I felt very alone. And I'm trying to talk to your parents about that so we can find a better way forward." "I could have helped more," she said, her voice small. "I just didn't think about it. You've always been the one helping us." The simple acknowledgement touched me deeply. "Thank you for saying that, Emma. That means a lot to me. Could I come over after school tomorrow? By myself, I mean? I could help you with stuff around the house, or we could just hang out." The offer, so genuine and uncomplicated, brought tears to my eyes. I'd like that very much. After we hung up, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table, turning our conversation over in my mind. Perhaps the youngest generation was the most capable of growth, of seeing beyond established patterns to new possibilities. Perhaps Emma, at 14, could understand what Robert at 45 seemed unable to grasp, that relationships thrive on mutual care, not one-way service. The next day brought a visit from William Curtis, who insisted on reviewing the changes to my will one final time before closing the file. We sat in my small office, the legal documents spread between us. "The primary changes are these," William summarized, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "The lake cabin property transfers to your niece Sarah Collins rather than your son Robert. Your financial assets will be divided with 30% going to Robert's family, 30% to a trust for your grandchildren's education accessible when they turn 21, and 40% to the Riverview Charitable Foundation's elder support programs. Your home will be sold upon your death, with proceeds added to these distributions. Michael's pocket watch collection goes to Sarah's son, Matthew." He looked up at me. "Is this still your wish?" I nodded, feeling a certainty that had grown stronger rather than weaker with time. "It is. And you understand that Robert may contest these changes? That there could be significant family conflict as a result?" "I understand," I said quietly. "But my hope is that he'll eventually see this not as punishment, but as a realignment. I'm not disinheriting him. I'm simply ensuring that my legacy reflects my values and supports those who have shown genuine care." William removed his glasses, his expression softening from professional to personal. "I've known you and your family for a long time, Margaret. Long enough to have observed some of the dynamics at play here. For what it's worth, I think you're making a thoughtful choice, not a reactive one." His validation meant more than I expected. As he gathered the documents into his briefcase, he added, "Just remember, you can always make further adjustments if circumstances change. This isn't irrevocable until..." He trailed off delicately. "Until I'm gone," I finished for him. "I know. And I appreciate that flexibility, though I don't anticipate changing my mind." After William left, I sat at my small desk for a long time, looking at the family photographs arranged on the wall. Robert's graduation from business school, Emma and Tyler as toddlers on the dock at the lake cabin, my late husband Michael standing proudly beside the grandfather clock he'd restored, his pocket watch chain just visible against his vest. These frozen moments of family happiness seemed disconnected from current reality, like artifacts from another life. Yet they weren't false. These moments of connection and joy had been real. Somewhere along the way, we had lost the essence of what made them possible. The mutual care, the genuine interest in each other's well-being, the willingness to inconvenience ourselves for the sake of the people we loved. My revised will wouldn't restore that lost connection. Only honest communication and changed behavior could accomplish that miracle. But it might serve as a wake-up call, a final statement of values from a woman who had spent too many years silencing her own needs in service to others. Emma arrived after school the next day as promised, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a small bouquet of grocery store flowers clutched in her hand. "These are for you," she said, suddenly shy as she handed them to me. Yellow roses were Grandpa's favorite, right? For Grandma Rose? I was touched that she remembered this detail about Michael's devotion to my mother, Rose, and his annual tradition of yellow roses on her birthday long after she had passed. They were, I confirmed, hugging her awkwardly around my walker. Thank you, Emma. This is so thoughtful. We spent the afternoon in comfortable companionship. Emma worked on her homework at the kitchen table while I prepared a simple dinner, moving slowly but appreciating the return to even limited cooking. She asked thoughtful questions about my recovery, offered to reach items from high shelves, and generally showed an awareness of my needs that had been absent in her parents' approach. Mom said I shouldn't bother you with my problems right now, Emma confided as we ate the chicken and rice casserole we'd prepared together. Because you're dealing with enough. But that feels weird. Like we're supposed to pretend everything's normal, except when it's about your hip. I smiled at her perceptiveness. I'm still your grandmother, hip replacement or not. I still care about what's happening in your life. What's on your mind? She hesitated, pushing rice around her plate. There's this thing at school, a photography workshop over the summer. The teacher says I have real talent, but it's expensive and runs all day for 6 weeks. Mom and Dad say I need to focus on volleyball if I want a scholarship someday. I remembered our Sunday dinner conversation, my mention of photography classes as a dream deferred. Was it possible that my granddaughter shared this interest? This way of seeing the world? Do you enjoy volleyball? I asked carefully. She shrugged. It's okay. I'm good at it. But I don't love it the way some of the girls do. I play because Dad was so excited when I made varsity as a freshman, and Mom likes telling her friends about my tournaments. The familiar pattern revealed itself again. Desires subordinated to others' expectations. Personal dreams set aside to fulfill roles assigned by family. The cycle continuing into another generation. What if, I suggested, setting down my fork, we looked at this photography workshop together? Maybe there's a way to make it work alongside your other commitments. Emma's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in months. Really? You wouldn't think it's a waste of time? Creative expression is never a waste of time, I said firmly. And following your own interests is how you discover who you truly are, beyond what others expect of you. We spent the evening looking up the workshop details online and discussing how she might approach her parents about it. As we talked, I found myself wondering how different my own life might have been if I'd had someone to champion my interests this way, to validate my desires as worthy of pursuit, even when they didn't serve others' needs. When Robert arrived to pick Emma up, he seemed surprised to find us laughing together over old family photographs I'd dug out, including several embarrassing ones of him as a teenager with regrettable hair choices. You two seem to be having fun, he observed, his tone cautious but not unfriendly. Grandma's been telling me stories about when you were my age, Emma said, carefully replacing a photo in its album. And we've been talking about photography. Did you know she used to want to be a photographer? And now I'm thinking about that summer workshop Mr. Kaplan told me about. Robert glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Photography? That's the first I've heard of either of these interests. There's a lot we haven't talked about, I said simply. But we're starting now. After they left, the house felt less empty than usual. Emma's visit had reawakened something I'd almost forgotten. The joy of genuine connection based on mutual interest rather than obligation or service. We had related to each other as two people with thoughts and feelings worthy of exploration, not as provider and recipient of care. If such a relationship was possible with my 14-year-old granddaughter, was it also possible with my son? Could we find our way to a new understanding, one that honored both his needs and mine? The practical side of me remained skeptical, but a small seed of hope had been planted. That night, as I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from Robert. Emma hasn't stopped talking about your photography conversation. I didn't know you were interested in that. Were there other things I missed? The question seemed genuine, a small crack in the edifice of assumptions that had defined our relationship for so long. I typed back carefully. Many things, Robert. But it's never too late to start listening to each other. Let's talk soon. Really talk. His response came quickly. I'd like that. 3 simple words, yet they carried a weight of possibility I hadn't felt in years. I set the phone on my nightstand and eased myself into bed, mindful of my healing hip. Outside my window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, distant but brilliant against the gathering night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities to either reinforce old patterns or forge healthier ones. The changes to my will remained in place, a concrete manifestation of my evolved understanding of family obligation and legacy. But perhaps they would serve as a beginning rather than an ending, the start of honest dialogue about expectations, about reciprocity, about what we owed each other as family. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking not of what I had lost through this difficult process, but of what might yet be gained. Dignity, authentic connection, relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, it felt like a road worth traveling. 2 days after Emma's visit, Robert called to ask if he could stop by alone. His request, so different from his usual assumptions or directives, caught me by surprise. Of course, I said, curious about what had prompted this unusual initiative. I'm not going anywhere. He arrived that evening after work, still in his business attire, but with his tie loosened and collar unbuttoned. Small concessions to comfort that reminded me of Michael after a long day. The resemblance between father and son had grown stronger as Robert aged, visible in the slight furrow between his brows as he concentrated, and the way his right hand unconsciously patted his pocket for keys or phone when he was uncertain. I brought dinner, he said, holding up a bag from Giovanni's, the Italian restaurant that was actually my favorite, not the chain place they'd brought last Sunday. I remember you saying once that their eggplant parmesan was the best in town. The small detail, that he had remembered this preference of mine, felt significant in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Thank you, that was thoughtful. We sat at the kitchen table rather than the more formal dining room, the space where so many family meals had been shared over decades. Robert unpacked the food carefully, his movements deliberate, almost hesitant. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, preparing for something. Emma's photography workshop application is due next week, he finally said, serving me a portion of eggplant before taking his own. Diane and I talked it over. We're going to let her do it instead of the volleyball intensive she was signed up for. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. She has a real interest in it. Yeah. He twirled pasta around his fork without eating it. It got me thinking about something you said the other night, about never asking what dreams you might still have, about only seeing you in relation to our needs. He met my eyes directly. Was I really that blind, Mom? The question hung between us, weighted with decades of relationship patterns. I chose my words carefully, wanting honesty without unnecessary hurt. I don't think it was blindness so much as convenience, I said finally. It was easier for everyone if I was simply available, accommodating, without complications or needs of my own. And I allowed it, encouraged it even. I wanted to be needed. Robert set down his fork. Dad used to say that about you, that you were happiest when you were taking care of everyone else. I guess I just accepted that as the natural order of things. Your father wasn't entirely wrong, I acknowledged. There is genuine joy in caring for the people you love. But somewhere along the way, care became obligation, and my identity became solely defined by what I could provide to others. And then when you needed us, we hired someone else to do the job, Robert said quietly. I see how that looks now. The simple acknowledgement that he could at least see my perspective felt like the first real breakthrough in years of accumulated misunderstanding. We ate in silence for a few moments, the admission settling between us. I've been thinking about what real support looks like, Robert continued eventually. Not just solving problems with money, which is my default, but actually being present. It's not something I've had much practice with. It's not too late to learn, I offered, for either of us. I'm trying to learn how to ask directly for what I need, instead of hoping people will somehow intuit it. Robert smiled faintly. That would certainly make things clearer for those of us who aren't great at reading between the lines. The conversation shifted to more neutral topics, a project he was working on, Tyler's progress with his science fair entry, the early spring flowers beginning to emerge in my garden. But something had changed in the quality of our interaction, a new attentiveness on Robert's part and a new directness on mine. We were both making effort, and the effort itself felt significant. As he prepared to leave, gathering the takeout, containers for disposal, Robert paused by the door. I'd like to come by more regularly, not just on Sundays with everyone. Maybe once a week, just the two of us? I'd like that, I said, genuinely touched by the offer. And Mom? He hesitated, looking suddenly uncomfortable. I've been meaning to ask, how are you managing financially with all these medical expenses? The insurance copays, the medications, Nurse Taylor? Do you need any help? The question was so unexpected that I nearly laughed. For years, financial support had flowed in only one direction, from me to them. This reversal, this acknowledgement that I might have needs requiring assistance, represented a fundamental shift in our dynamic. I'm managing, I assured him. My pension and Michael's life insurance provide enough, but thank you for asking. That means a lot. After he left, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table, replaying our conversation. The changes in Robert's approach were subtle but significant. The choice of my favorite restaurant, the attentive listening, the direct questions about my well-being, the offer of financial help. Small steps, certainly, but in a new direction. I wondered briefly if Emma had said something to him after her visit. If my granddaughter had somehow communicated what I'd been unable to express effectively. Perhaps it didn't matter what had catalyzed the change. What mattered was that something had shifted, creating space for new possibilities. The following week brought another unexpected development. Diane called on Wednesday morning, her tone uncharacteristically tentative. Margaret, I'm wondering if you might be free for lunch tomorrow. Just the two of us? In all the years of our relationship, Diane and I had never spent time alone together by mutual choice. Our interactions had always been mediated by Robert. Or the children. Our conversations polite but distant, focused on practical matters rather than personal connection. I'd enjoy that, I said, curiosity overcoming my initial wariness. Did you have somewhere in mind? I thought I might pick up something from the deli and bring it to you, since you're still recovering, unless you're feeling up to going out. The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, considering my mobility limitations, was another small indicator of change. The deli sounds perfect. Thank you. When Diane arrived the next day, precisely at noon, she brought not only lunch, but also a small potted orchid, its delicate blooms a soft shade of lavender. I remembered these were your favorites, she said, setting it on the kitchen counter. You mentioned it once when we were at that garden center, years ago. Like Robert's choice of restaurant, this small acknowledgement of my preferences felt significant. Evidence that some part of me as an individual, not just as a service provider, had registered with my daughter-in-law. We settled at the kitchen table with our sandwiches and iced tea, an initial awkwardness hovering between us. Diane was meticulously put together as always, her tailored blouse and perfectly styled hair contrasting with my more casual recovery. attire. But today, something in her usual armor of professionalism seemed less rigid, less defensive. "Robert told me about your conversation," she said finally, addressing the elephant in the room. "About feeling unsupported during your recovery." I nodded, waiting to see where she would take this. "I want you to know that it wasn't intentional, Margaret. The lack of support, I mean." She focused on arranging her napkin precisely beside her plate. "When my mother was ill when I was growing up, my father hired nurses and then put her in a facility as soon as possible. That was just what was done in our family. Professional care was considered superior to family care, more dignified. Somehow." This glimpse into Diane's family background offered context I'd never had before. In 15 years of knowing her, we'd never discussed her upbringing or the models of family care she'd been exposed to. "That helps me understand your approach better," I said. "We all carry these patterns forward, often without examining them." "But that's no excuse for not seeing what you actually needed," she continued. "For not asking. For assuming our way was the only way." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm sorry, Margaret. We should have done better." The simple, straightforward apology, delivered without qualifications or defensiveness, caught me off guard. I had come to expect resistance from Diane, a professional habit of reframing situations to minimize personal accountability. This direct acknowledgement represented a vulnerability I'd rarely glimpsed in her. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a great deal to me." We ate in silence for a few moments, the tension between us easing slightly. Then Diane surprised me again. "Robert mentioned you were interested in photography, that it was something you'd always wanted to pursue." I nodded, waiting to see where this was going. "The university where I work is offering a series of weekend workshops in basic photography techniques, composition, lighting, that sort of thing. They're designed for beginners, very relaxed and supportive." She reached into her purse and withdrew a brochure. "I thought you might be interested. They even have accommodations for people with mobility issues." I accepted the brochure, touched by the gesture. "This looks wonderful. Thank you for thinking of me." "It's the least I could do," Diane said, a hint of her usual briskness returning. "And it would be convenient for transportation since I'm on campus anyway for Saturday meetings. I could drop you off and pick you up without any trouble." The practical note was so characteristic of Diane that I smiled. Even in this moment of connection, she remained herself, organized, efficient, solution-oriented. But now her practical nature was being directed toward supporting my interests rather than minimizing my needs, and that made all the difference. "I'd like that," I said. "Very much." Our conversation drifted to other topics. Emma's excitement about the summer photography workshop, Tyler's growing interest in computer programming, the early spring garden planning I was doing from my window. We weren't suddenly best friends, Diane and I, but something had shifted. A space had opened between us where genuine exchange might grow. As she prepared to leave, Diane paused by the door, her expression uncertain. "I know things haven't always been easy between us, Margaret. I'm not naturally demonstrative the way you are with the children, but I do respect you, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for our family." The acknowledgement, so long in coming, felt like a gift. "Thank you, Diane. That means a lot to me." After she left, I sat with the photography workshop brochure, running my fingers over its glossy surface. The classes began in early April, just as Dr. Gonzalez predicted I would be able to manage without the walker. I felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect of learning something new, of pursuing an interest solely because it brought me joy, not because it served someone else's needs. That evening, I called Sarah in Arizona. Our conversations had become more frequent since my surgery, evolving from brief check-ins to substantive exchanges. Today, I wanted to share the recent developments with Robert and Diane, to process what felt like tentative progress toward a healthier family dynamic. "They're making an effort," Sarah acknowledged after I'd recounted the recent visits. "That's significant, but I hope you're keeping your expectations realistic, Aunt Margaret. People don't change overnight, especially when the old patterns have worked so well for them for so long." Her caution was well-founded. I'd seen enough false starts in family relationships to know that initial goodwill could easily revert to familiar patterns when tested by time or stress. "I'm cautiously optimistic," I said, "but I'm not abandoning the changes to my will just yet. Those stay in place unless I see sustained change over time." "Speaking of the will," Sarah said, her tone shifting to something more hesitant, "I got a call from your attorney last week about the lake cabin." I sat up straighter, surprised. "William called you? He wasn't supposed to discuss that with anyone yet." "He didn't give specifics," Sarah assured me. "Just asked some general questions about whether I had fond memories of the place, whether I'd ever consider maintaining it if it came into my possession. I think he was feeling out whether your revised plans made practical sense." Relief mixed with irritation at William's initiative. While I appreciated his thoroughness, I hadn't authorized him to approach Sarah yet. I'd wanted to be the one to tell her about the cabin inheritance when the time was right. "And what did you tell him?" I asked, curious despite my annoyance. "That the cabin represents some of the best memories of my childhood. That if by some chance it ever came to me, I'd preserve it exactly as it is, as a place for family to gather and remember." Her voice softened. "That the last thing I'd ever do is sell it for development." Her words reassured me that my instincts about the cabin had been correct. Sarah understood its value beyond the financial, its importance as a repository of family history and potential site of future memory-making. "Thank you for telling me about William's call," I said. "I'll speak with him about respecting confidentiality until I'm ready to share my decisions." "Aunt Margaret," Sarah said carefully, "you don't owe me the cabin or anything else. Whatever you decide about your estate should reflect your values and wishes, not any sense of obligation." The simple statement, so different from the entitled expectations I'd grown accustomed to from Robert, warmed me deeply. "I know that, Sarah. And that's precisely why I'm considering changes to my original plans. Because I want my legacy to reflect my true values, not just default family assumptions." After we hung up, I made my way carefully to the spare bedroom that served as my office. From the filing cabinet, I retrieved William's card and dialed his number despite the late hour. His voicemail picked up, as expected. "William, it's Margaret Wilson. I understand you contacted my niece Sarah about the lake cabin. While I appreciate your thoroughness, I'd prefer you not discuss my estate planning with family members without my explicit permission. Please call me tomorrow to discuss this further." The assertiveness in my tone surprised me. 6 months ago, I might have let the breach of confidentiality slide, reluctant to create conflict or appear demanding. Now, I recognize the importance of maintaining boundaries, of ensuring my wishes were respected, of advocating for myself as vigorously as I had always advocated for others. The following morning brought another change to my new routine. Tyler appeared at my door after school, alone and unannounced, clutching his science textbook and looking uncharacteristically serious. "Grandma, can I ask you something? It's for my science project." I welcomed him in, touched by this independent visit. "Of course, sweetheart. What's your project about?" He settled at the kitchen table, opening his battered textbook to a page, marked with a sticky note. "It's about different generations' experiences with technology. I'm supposed to interview someone from an older generation about how technology changed during their lifetime." I smiled at being designated the representative of an older generation, though of course it was accurate. "I'd be happy to help. What do you want to know?" Tyler pulled out a notebook and pen, suddenly all business. "First question, what was the most significant technological change you experienced growing up?" We spent the next hour engaged in a thoughtful conversation about technological evolution, from the party line telephone of my childhood to the first family television, from manual typewriters to personal computers, from encyclopedias to the internet. Tyler took careful notes, occasionally stopping to ask follow-up questions that revealed genuine curiosity beyond his assignment requirements. "This is really interesting, Grandma," he said as he reviewed his notes. "I never thought about how weird it must be to go from having 3 TV channels to, infinite streaming options." "The pace of change has been remarkable," I agreed. "Sometimes overwhelming, but mostly exciting." Tyler closed his notebook, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like my generation, think older people don't understand technology? Like we're kind of dismissive about it?" The insightful question surprised me. "Sometimes," I admitted. "There's often an assumption that age equals technological incompetence, but learning doesn't stop at a certain birthday. Your grandfather was sending emails and managing digital photo collections well into his 70s. "I didn't know that." "About Grandpa," Tyler said, looking genuinely interested. "Dad always made it sound like Grandpa was kind of old-fashioned about everything." "Your grandfather was selective about which technologies he adopted," I explained. "He wasn't interested in social media or video games, but he embraced digital tools that served his interests: photography, genealogy, woodworking research." Tyler nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Like you choose the technology that's useful for what you actually care about, not just use everything because it exists." "Exactly," I said, impressed by his understanding. "It's about intentional adoption, rather than either wholesale embrace or rejection." As our conversation concluded and Tyler packed up his materials, he surprised me with an unexpected observation. "You know, Grandma, this is the longest conversation we've ever had, just the two of us. Usually there's always someone else around. Or you're helping with homework, or making dinner, or something." The simple truth of his statement struck me forcefully. Despite years of being physically present in Tyler's life, driving him to activities, supervising homework, preparing meals, we had rarely engaged in sustained, direct communication focused on ideas rather than practical matters. "You're right," I acknowledged, "and I've enjoyed it very much." "Me too," he said, shouldering his backpack. "Maybe I could come by again, even after my project is done?" "I'd like that," I said, touched by the initiative. "Very much." After Tyler left, I found myself reflecting on the day's interactions. Williams, boundary crossing, Tyler's thoughtful interview, the shifts occurring in my relationships with various family members. A pattern was emerging, subtle but significant. My illness and subsequent setting of boundaries had created space for new kinds of connections, for relationships based on mutual interest and genuine exchange rather than service and obligation. That evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone chimed with a text message from Robert. "Think I found something of Dad's you might want to see. Old photo albums in the attic storage. Can I bring them by this weekend?" The casual offer? So different. From the task-oriented communication that had characterized our interactions for years, felt like another small bridge being extended across the divide my illness had revealed. "I'd love that," I texted back. "Saturday afternoon?" His response came quickly. "Perfect. I'll bring lunch. Any requests?" The simple question about my preferences, my desires, represented everything I had been missing in our relationship. Not grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but the basic consideration that acknowledges another person's individuality and agency. "Surprise me," I replied, smiling at the small pleasure of being asked. As I set the phone aside and turned out the light, I found myself thinking about legacy. Not just the material possessions addressed in my revised will, but the relational patterns that would outlive me. What lessons would my grandchildren carry forward about family obligation, about reciprocity, about the balance between giving and receiving. What understanding would Robert and Diane develop about partnership in their later years? The changes to my estate planning remained in place, a concrete manifestation of my evolved understanding of family dynamics. But perhaps their greatest value wasn't in the redistribution of assets, but in the conversations they might eventually prompt about value, about relationship, about what we owe each other as human beings connected by blood and choice. Outside, my window, the quarter moon cast silver light across my garden, illuminating the early spring bulbs pushing determinedly through soil still cold from winter. New growth emerging from dormancy, fragile but persistent, reaching toward light. A fitting metaphor, perhaps, for the tentative changes taking place within my family. Changes that required nurturing, patience, and the courage to grow in new directions despite the comfort of familiar patterns. Saturday dawned with unexpected warmth, a preview of spring that coaxed crocuses into bloom along my garden path. I watched the transformation from my kitchen window while waiting for Robert to arrive with the promised photo albums. These small moments of natural beauty had become more precious during my recovery, markers of time passing and healing progressing in ways both visible and invisible. Robert arrived promptly at noon, juggling a bakery box and what appeared to be several weathered leather albums. The sight of those familiar covers, Michael's meticulous organization of our family history, sent a wave of emotion through me that I hadn't anticipated. "Found these in the attic storage," Robert explained, setting everything on the kitchen table. "I was looking for Tyler's old baseball gear and stumbled across them. I didn't even know Dad had kept such detailed albums." "He was the family historian," I said, running my fingers over the embossed cover of the topmost album. Every Christmas, he'd spend a week organizing that year's photographs, labeling everything, preserving the stories. Robert looked surprised. "I always thought that was your project." "No," I smiled, remembering Michael hunched over these very albums at our dining room table, glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Your father believed family history was too important to trust to memory alone. Pictures fade less than recollections," he always said. I opened the first album, revealing meticulously arranged photographs of Robert as a child, riding his first bicycle, proudly displaying a missing front tooth, falling asleep under the Christmas tree in flannel pajamas. Each image was accompanied by Michael's neat handwriting noting dates, occasions, and often small observations about Robert's personality or achievements. Robert, age 7, contemplating the lake from the dock. He asked why water always needs to move. I read aloud. From one caption, "A philosopher in the making." Robert leaned closer, his expression softening. "I don't remember that at all." "You were always asking questions like that. Big questions about how the world worked. Your father loved that about you." I turned the page to reveal more snapshots of family life, picnics, holidays, ordinary moments elevated to significance through the act of preservation. "I don't think I realized how much attention Dad paid to these details," Robert said quietly. "He always seemed so focused on work, on practical matters." "Michael contained multitudes," I said, the phrase bringing a fresh wave of missing him. "He was practical, yes. The household financial manager, the retirement planner, the fix-anything. Handyman. But he was also the one who noticed when the first cardinal returned each spring, who kept every Father's Day card you ever made him, who could tell you exactly what you said the first time you saw the ocean." Robert was silent for a long moment, studying a photograph of himself and Michael working on a birdhouse in the backyard workshop. Both were focused intently on their task, their expressions nearly identical in concentration. "I wish I'd known this side of him better," he said finally. "I feel like I missed something important." The admission, so vulnerable, so unlike the confident professional persona Robert typically projected, opened a door between us that had been closed for too long. He wasn't always good at showing this part of himself, I acknowledged. Especially as you got older. I think he worried about appearing sentimental, about embarrassing you with too much emotion. It was generational, partly. We spent the next hour paging through the albums, rediscovering family moments long forgotten, vacations at the lake cabin, school performances, everyday scenes around our old home. With each photograph, each carefully preserved memory, I watched Robert encountering a different version of his father, a more nuanced understanding of the man who had raised him. "Oh, look at this one," I said, pointing to a photograph I'd always loved. It showed Robert at about 16, sitting on the cabin's screened porch with Michael. Both were in profile, clearly deep in conversation, unaware of being photographed. "That was the summer you were trying to decide whether to quit baseball for debate team. Your father spent hours listening to you weigh the options." Robert studied the image. I remember that conversation. He told me to follow what challenged me, not just what came easily. He looked up, his expression thoughtful. I gave Emma the exact same advice about photography versus volleyball. "The good parts of our parents stay with us," I said quietly. "Sometimes even when we don't realize their origin." As we continued through the albums, we came across a photograph I had nearly forgotten. Michael and me on our 25th anniversary, dancing in our backyard under strings of lights Robert and his friends had helped hang. I was looking up at Michael, laughing at something he'd said, while he gazed at me with unguarded adoration. "I've never seen this picture," Robert said, studying it closely. "Your father kept it in his wallet," I explained. "The original, I mean. This must be the duplicate he made for the album." Robert's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. "You two always seemed to have this certainty about each other. Even when you disagreed, there was this foundation that never seemed to shake." "It wasn't always as solid as it appeared from the outside," I admitted. "We had our struggles, especially early on. But we learned to face them together rather than apart, to see problems as shared challenges rather than battles between opponents." "Diane and I don't always manage that perspective," Robert said, the admission clearly difficult for him. "Especially lately. We tend to retreat to our corners when things get complicated." This glimpse into his marriage, something Robert rarely shared with me, felt significant. "Marriage is hard work," I acknowledged, "especially when you're juggling careers and children and all the logistics of modern life." "It's more than logistics," he said, closing the album in front of him. "Seeing what happened with you, how quickly we defaulted to outsourcing your care, how little we considered what you might actually need beyond the practical aspects. It made Diane and me look at our own patterns, how we relate to each other, to the kids, whether we're building the kind of family where people truly show up for each other." His candor surprised me. Robert had always been guarded about his marriage, presenting a united front with Diane regardless of whatever tensions might exist beneath the surface. "That kind of reflection is valuable," I said carefully, "even when it's uncomfortable." "It's been more than uncomfortable," he admitted. "It's been like realizing we've been building a house on sand for years. All these assumptions about what family means, what we owe each other, what success looks like. They're all being questioned. Now?" I thought of my revised will, still undisclosed to Robert, and wondered how it would affect this period of reflection he and Diane were experiencing. Would it reinforce important realizations or derail tentative progress? The timing of such a revelation suddenly seemed more complicated than it had when I'd first decided to make the changes. "Every family develops its own culture," I said, "its own set of values and expectations, often unspoken. Sometimes it takes a disruption to make those implicit understandings visible enough to examine." "Your illness was that disruption for us," Robert acknowledged, "and not in a good way initially. We failed you, Mom. I failed you. I see that now." The direct acknowledgement of what had happened, without qualifications or excuses, felt like a watershed moment in our evolving relationship. Not a complete resolution, but a necessary foundation for whatever might come next. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply. "It means a great deal to hear you acknowledge it." Robert nodded, his expression serious. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about Dad since finding these albums. About what he would have expected from me in this situation. About what kind of son I want to be in the years we have left." The phrase "years we have left" struck me forcefully. A recognition of mortality, of limited time, that seemed new in Robert's typically future-oriented perspective. "I'm not giving up on us," I said, reaching across the table to cover his hand. With mine. "On our relationship, on the possibility of something healthier moving forward. Your father would want that for both of us." Robert turned his hand to grasp mine, the gesture unexpectedly emotional. "Me neither. I want to do better. I need to do better." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of past patterns and future possibilities settling between us. Then Robert cleared his throat and reached for the bakery box he'd brought, changing the emotional register in a way that felt necessary after such intense conversation. "Almost forgot. I brought those almond croissants you used to get for us, on special occasions. The ones from Bellamy's Bakery. Another remembered preference, another small acknowledgement of me as a person with specific tastes and memories." "I haven't had one of those in years," I said, genuinely pleased. "Thank you." As we shared the pastries and coffee, our conversation shifted to lighter topics. Tyler's science project, Emma's excitement about both the photography workshop and the university classes I would be taking, plans for the garden once I was more mobile. The heaviness of our earlier exchange remained as an undercurrent, but not an uncomfortable one. Something had shifted between us, an honesty that made even casual conversation feel more authentic. When Robert prepared to leave, gathering the photo albums to return them to the box he'd brought, I made a spontaneous decision. "Leave them," I said. "I'd like to spend more time with them. And maybe Emma would enjoy looking through them when she comes over. There's family history here she might appreciate, especially now that she's developing an interest in photography." Robert nodded, understanding the significance of the request. These weren't just physical objects, but repositories of our shared past, tangible connections to Michael and the family life we had built together. "Of course," he said, pushing the stack gently toward me. "They're yours after all." After he left, I remained at the kitchen table, slowly paging through the albums again. Each photograph told a story, not just the obvious narrative captured in the image, but the deeper story of who had thought to take the picture, who had deemed it worth preserving, what had been happening just outside the frame. I paused at a particular image I'd overlooked earlier, a photograph of me in my early 40s, standing in this very kitchen surrounded by bowls and ingredients, clearly in the middle of teaching a teenage Robert how to bake something. My expression was patient, engaged, focused entirely on him rather than the camera. Michael must have taken it without either of us noticing, capturing a moment of connection that epitomized so much of my relationship with my son during those years. The sight of my younger self, so energetic, so unquestioningly devoted to nurturing Robert's development, brought a complicated mix of emotions. Pride in the mother I had been. Sadness for the gradual erosion of that attentive connection over the years. Hope that something of that essential bond might be recovered, transformed into a new relationship appropriate to this stage of both our lives. The phone rang, interrupting my reflections. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID. "I just had the most interesting call," she said without preamble when I answered. "From Robert, your son Robert." Surprised, I set down the photo album. "Robert called you? What about?" "The lake cabin, primarily. He asked if I had fond memories of it, what the place meant to me. whether I'd ever consider being its caretaker. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this unexpected development. Had William broken confidence again, revealing my estate plans to Robert despite my explicit instructions? Or had Robert somehow deduced my intentions from our conversations about the cabin and family legacy? "What did you tell him?" I asked cautiously. "The truth. That the cabin represents some of the most important family connections in my life. That I'd treasure the opportunity to preserve it for future generations." Sarah paused. "Margaret, I think he knows about the changes to your will. Or at least suspects them." I closed my eyes briefly, absorbing this possibility. "Did he say anything specific about my estate plans?" "Not directly, but he did say something about wanting to make amends for past mistakes, about ensuring family treasures ended up with people who truly valued them." Her voice softened. "He also asked about Michael's pocket watch collection, whether Matthew still had an interest in horology." The specific mention of the pocket watches, another item I'd redirected in my revised will, confirmed my suspicion. Somehow, Robert had learned at least the broad outlines of my estate changes. The question was how he had discovered this information and what he intended to do with it. "This is unexpected," I said carefully. "He wasn't angry, Margaret," Sarah offered, apparently sensing my concern. "If anything, he seemed reflective, said something about understanding why certain choices might make sense given recent events." This characterization aligned with the Robert I'd spent the afternoon with, thoughtful, self-aware, grappling with uncomfortable realizations about family patterns. But people were complex, reactions evolved over time, and initial acceptance could easily transform into something more adversarial with further reflection. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I should probably speak with William about confidentiality, again, and then with Robert directly." After hanging up with Sarah, I immediately called William's office. Given the weekend, I expected to leave a message, but to my surprise, he answered directly. "Margaret," he said, his tone cautious, "I was just about to call you." "Did you discuss my estate changes with my son?" I asked without preamble. A heavy sigh came through the line. "Not intentionally, but yes, there was an unfortunate disclosure." "Explain," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Robert came to my office yesterday, asking for guidance on setting up education trusts for Emma and Tyler. During our conversation, my assistant brought in some paperwork for me to sign, routine matters for various clients. Your revised will documentation was unfortunately among those papers, with the summary page visible. Robert saw it." I closed my eyes, picturing the scene, the accidental reveal, Robert's likely shock at seeing document headings referencing cabin transfers and charitable foundation designations. "What exactly did he see?" I asked. "Just the summary page headings, nothing detailed, but enough to understand that significant changes were being made regarding the cabin, the pocket watch collection, and the overall distribution percentages." William's voice carried genuine regret. "Margaret, I can't apologize enough for this breach. It was completely unprofessional, regardless of being unintentional." "It's done now," I said, processing this information against the backdrop of Robert's visit today. "The question is how to move forward." "Robert didn't confront me about what he saw," William offered. "He simply concluded our business about the education trusts and left. Very controlled, very professional. If you'd like me to speak with him to explain that these changes are still in draft form." "No," I interrupted. "No more discussions about my estate planning without my direct involvement. I'll handle this conversation myself." After hanging up, I sat for a long time with this new development. Robert had known about the changes to my will while looking through family albums with me today. Had known, but chosen not to mention it, not to confront me or question my decisions. Instead, He had engaged authentically with family history, had acknowledged his failures during my recovery, had even reached out to Sarah in what appeared to be an attempt to understand rather than challenge my revised plans. This response, so different from the entitled indignation I might have expected, suggested a depth of reflection I hadn't fully credited him with. Perhaps the disruption caused by my illness and subsequent boundary setting had catalyzed more fundamental reconsideration than I'd realized. The situation required careful handling. I could pretend ignorance, wait for Robert to raise the issue himself. I could confront the situation directly, acknowledge that I knew he had seen the documents and explain my reasoning. Or I could take a middle path, create an opening for discussion without forcing the issue, allow him to engage with the topic if and when he felt ready. As I considered these options, my phone chimed with a text message from Emma. "Grandma, can I come over tomorrow to look at those photo albums Dad mentioned? Also, I have something to show you from my photography class." The simple request, so normal and yet so precious in its indication of genuine interest in spending time with me, helped clarify my thinking. What mattered most wasn't the technical details of estate distribution, but the quality of relationships we were building now, in whatever time remained to us. The will was simply a document, important, but ultimately less significant than the living connections it was meant to reflect. I texted Emma back, "Would love to see you tomorrow. The albums are ready and waiting. Bring your photography to show me." Then I composed a more difficult message to Robert. "Thank you for today. The albums brought back so many memories. I understand you may have learned about some changes I'm considering regarding my estate. When you're ready to discuss this, I'm here. No rush, no pressure, just open conversation whenever you feel prepared." I hesitated before sending, wondering if this direct acknowledgement might force a conversation he wasn't ready to have. But our relationship had suffered too long from indirection, from assumptions made but never articulated, from important matters left unaddressed until they became too charged to approach easily. Better clarity now, even if uncomfortable, than continued shadows between us. The response came more quickly than I'd expected. "I was wondering how to bring this up. Yes, I saw some documents at William's office yesterday. I'd like to talk about it, but not from a place of entitlement or anger. Just understanding. Maybe Tuesday evening after work?" The maturity of his response, accepting the reality without defensiveness, seeking understanding rather than confrontation, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. This was not the Robert who had dismissed my needs during early recovery, who had expected service without reciprocity, who had viewed my resources as extensions of his own. This was someone wrestling with hard truths about family patterns, someone willing to examine uncomfortable revelations about his own behavior and assumptions. "Tuesday evening would be perfect," I replied. "I'll make tea." The following day, Emma arrived promptly after lunch, her backpack bulging with what appeared to be photography equipment. Her enthusiasm was palpable as she unpacked a borrowed digital camera and a folder of printed images on the kitchen table. "My teacher says I have a good eye for composition," she explained, spreading out several black and white photographs of urban landscapes, fire escapes creating geometric patterns against brick walls, reflections in puddles distorting familiar, storefronts, shadows stretching dramatically across empty playgrounds. I studied the images with genuine appreciation. There was something distinctive in Emma's perspective, an attention to overlooked details, an ability to find beauty in ordinary corners of the world, a sensitivity to the interplay of light and shadow. "These are remarkable, Emma," I said, examining a particularly striking image of an elderly woman feeding pigeons, her weathered hands and the bird's feathers creating a visual harmony that spoke to something essential about human connection with nature. "You've captured something important here, not just what these scenes look like, but how they feel." Emma's expression brightened at the specific observation. "That's exactly what Mr. Kaplan said. That photography isn't just about recording what exists. but about showing how we experience what exists. A wise teacher, I noted, continuing to examine her work. You know, your grandfather was interested in photography too, not as an art form so much as documentation, but he understood the power of images to preserve moments that might otherwise be lost to memory. Dad mentioned that when he saw these, Emma said, carefully returning her prints to their folder. He said Grandpa would have loved seeing my perspective. This small evidence that Robert had not only looked at Emma's photography, but had connected it to family history, to Michael's interests and values, felt significant. Another indication of shifting patterns, of attention being paid to connections, previously overlooked. We turned to the photo albums then, Emma asking insightful questions about the people and places captured in the aging photographs. She was particularly interested in images of me as a young woman, before motherhood had become my primary identity. "You look so different here," she said, pointing to a photograph of me in my mid-20s, standing proudly in front of the university library where I'd secured my first professional position. "So, I don't know. Determined?" I was, I acknowledged, studying my younger self with a mixture of recognition and distance. I had plans for my career, for graduate school eventually. I loved the library, the whole world of information organization and accessibility. But then you had Dad and became a mom instead? Emma asked, the question straightforward rather than judgmental. My priorities shifted, I explained, choosing my words carefully. I still worked at the library part-time for many years, but yes, raising your father became my primary focus. It was a different era, with different expectations for mothers. Emma nodded, considering this. Do you ever regret it? Putting your own plans aside for family? The directness of the question, so characteristic of 14-year-old perspective, caught me slightly off guard. But Emma deserved an honest answer, not a sanitized platitude about maternal fulfillment. Regret isn't quite the right word, I said thoughtfully. I made choices that reflected my values at that time, in that cultural context. I treasured raising your father, creating a home with your grandfather. But I do sometimes wonder about the roads not taken, the professional contributions I might have made with different choices. That makes sense, Emma said, with the simple acceptance of the young. Then, more hesitantly, Mom and Dad argue sometimes about her work. He wants her to be more available for family stuff, but she says her career matters too, that she doesn't want to look back with regrets. This glimpse into tensions in Robert and Diane's marriage, filtered through their daughter's perspective, revealed complexities I hadn't fully appreciated. Robert, having been raised by a mother who prioritized family over career, perhaps expected similar choices from his wife. Diane, coming from a different background and generation, was navigating different expectations and possibilities. These aren't easy balances to strike, I said carefully. Every family has to find its own way through these questions. What matters is honest communication about needs and values. Emma looked thoughtful. I think that's what they're trying. To do more now. Actually talk about the hard stuff instead of just getting irritated with each other. We continued through the albums, the conversation flowing naturally between observations about the photographs and reflections on family dynamics, past and present. Emma showed particular interest in images of the lake cabin, asking detailed questions about its history and the memories associated with it. Dad mentioned you might be leaving the cabin to your niece Sarah instead of him, she said casually, without looking up from a photograph of the dock at sunset. He said she really loves that place and would keep it exactly as it is. The direct reference to my estate plans, delivered so matter-of-factly, momentarily stunned me. Robert had not only processed this information himself, but had discussed it with his children, apparently without resentment or dramatic framing. Your father told you about that? I asked, watching her reaction carefully. Emma nodded, still studying the photograph. He said sometimes things should go to the people who value them most, not just to whoever's next in line. That Sarah has all these memories of the cabin from when she was my age, and it means something different to her than it does to him. The maturity of this framing, presenting my decision as reasonable rather than as a personal rejection, touched me deeply. Robert wasn't just accepting the changes to my will, he was helping his children understand them in context, without bitterness or entitlement. The cabin has always been special to Sarah, I confirmed. Her father, my brother, spent his last healthy summer there before he became ill. She associates it with some of her most precious family memories. That makes sense then, Emma said simply. Dad said we could still visit sometimes if Sarah's okay with it. That maybe our families could get to know each other better. This suggestion of increased connection between the branches of our family, of relationship building rather than property dispute, represented perhaps the most significant shift in Robert's approach to the situation. Rather than seeing Sarah's inheritance as coming at his expense, he was exploring how it might enhance broader family bonds. I think Sarah would welcome that, I said, making a mental note to discuss this possibility with my niece. As our afternoon together drew to a close, Emma carefully helped me return the albums to their storage box, treating these family artifacts with appropriate reverence. Before leaving, she paused at the door, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. Grandma, I've been thinking about something. When you were sick and needed help, we should have been here more. I should have been here more. Not just because you've always helped us, but because that's what family means. The simple statement, delivered without prevarication or justification, held more genuine understanding than many adults manage to achieve. Emma had grasped the essential truth that had been missing in our family dynamic, reciprocity as the foundation of meaningful connection. Thank you for saying that, sweetheart, I said, touched by her directness. That means a great deal to me. After Emma left, I spent the evening reflecting on the day's revelations. Robert had not only come to terms with the changes to my estate plan, but had actively helped his children understand and accept them. He had framed the decisions not as rejection, but as thoughtful allocation of resources according to meaning and connection. He had even proposed building relationship with Sarah's family, transforming what could have been a source of division into an opportunity for new connections. This evolution, from entitled expectation to mature acceptance, represented a fundamental shift in Robert's understanding of family obligation and legacy. The recognition that inheritance wasn't simply a matter of biological succession, but of meaningful stewardship. That some possessions carried emotional significance that transcended monetary value, that family wealth could be directed according to values rather than default assumptions. These were perspectives I hadn't expected him to embrace so readily. Tuesday evening arrived with a sense of both apprehension and hope. I prepared Robert's favorite tea, arranged comfortable seating in the living room rather than the more formal dining area, and tried to approach the coming conversation with an open mind rather than defensive preparation. Robert arrived directly from work, his business attire slightly rumpled after a long day, but his expression calm, even resolved. He accepted the offered tea with a quiet thank you, taking a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. I should start by apologizing for learning about your estate changes the way I did, he began. That was private information I wasn't meant to see yet. William explained what happened, I acknowledged. An unfortunate accident, but perhaps it's brought us to an important conversation sooner rather than later. Robert nodded, his hands wrapped around the teacup as if drawing strength from its warmth. When I first saw those documents, just glimpses of headings about the cabin going to Sarah, changes to distribution percentages, my first reaction was hurt. I won't pretend otherwise. His honesty was refreshing. No pretense that he had immediately embraced these changes with enlightened acceptance. That's understandable, I said. We're all conditioned to certain expectations about family inheritance. But then I started thinking about why you might make these changes, he continued. About how we responded when you needed us. About what we've demonstrated through our actions regarding what we truly value. He met my eyes directly, and I realized I couldn't argue with your assessment. The simple acknowledgement that my revised estate plan reflected accurate observations about family dynamics rather than unfair punishment felt like a breakthrough in our evolving relationship. The changes aren't about punishment, I said, quietly. They're about alignment, about ensuring that my resources go where they'll be most meaningfully received and utilized. I know that now, Robert said. At first, I just saw rejection, but the more I thought about it, the more I understood it as recalibration, a realistic response to patterns that have developed over years. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this shared understanding settling between us. Then Robert continued, his voice steady but vulnerable. I called Sarah. I wanted to understand her connection to the cabin, to hear about what it meant to her. And listening to her stories, about summers with her father, about traditions they maintained there, about how she's kept those memories alive for her own children, I realized she's the right person to inherit that place. She'll preserve what makes it special in ways I probably wouldn't. The maturity of this perspective, recognizing that the highest value of the cabin lay in its preservation as a site of family memory rather than its development potential, moved me deeply. Thank you for telling me that, I said, and for helping. Emma understand it that way too. She mentioned your conversation with her. Robert smiled slightly. Kids understand fairness better than we sometimes give them credit for. When I explained about Sarah's connection to the place, Emma immediately, got it, said it made perfect sense for someone who really loved the cabin to be its caretaker. She's a wise young woman, I observed, with remarkable empathy. She gets that from you, Robert said, the compliment offered simply, without calculation. That ability to see beyond surface appearances to what matters underneath. The conversation flowed from there into a more detailed discussion of my estate planning changes, not with the legalistic precision of formal documents, but with the human context that gave them meaning. I explained my decision to redirect portions of my estate to the Riverview Charitable Foundation, whose elder support programs had revealed their value during my recovery. Robert listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about my reasoning rather than challenging the underlying decisions. I want you to know, he said as our conversation drew toward its natural conclusion, that I'm not contesting any of these changes. Not the cabin, not the charitable donations, not the trusts for the kids that bypass Diane and me as intermediaries. These are your resources to direct according to your values and judgment. The simple statement, acknowledging my autonomy over my own legacy, represented perhaps the most significant shift in our relationship. For years, Robert had operated with implicit assumptions about eventual inheritance, about parental resources as extensions of family assets. This recognition of boundaries, of my right to make decisions based on my own assessment rather than default expectations, reflected genuine growth in his understanding of healthy family dynamics. Thank you for that, I said. It means more than you might realize. As Robert prepared to leave, gathering his coat and keys, he paused at the door with an expression that reminded me powerfully of Michael in moments of difficult but necessary truth-telling. I want you to know something else, Mom. These changes to your will, they've been clarifying for me. A wake-up call about what kind of son and husband and father I want to be. About what kind of example I'm setting for Emma and Tyler regarding how we treat the people we claim to love. He hesitated, clearly searching for the right words to express something important. I don't want them to learn what I've demonstrated, that family obligation is transactional, that care only flows in directions of convenience, that we show up only when it costs us nothing. I want them to see something better, something more like what you and Dad modeled at your best moments. The vulnerability of this admission, the recognition of his own shortcomings as a model of family values, touched me deeply. "It's never too late to demonstrate different priorities," I offered. "Children learn as much from our course corrections as from our initial directions." Robert nodded, absorbing this perspective. "I'm trying to make those corrections now, with you, with Diane, with the kids. It's not always comfortable, but it feels necessary. Overdue, actually." After he left, I sat in the quiet living room, processing the conversation. The changes to my will, originally conceived as a necessary realignment of resources with values, had catalyzed something more significant than I had anticipated. Not just acceptance of altered inheritance patterns, but deeper reflection on family obligation, on reciprocity, on what we owe each other as people connected by both blood and choice. The notification that had arrived that Tuesday morning, delivering news of my deteriorating hip and necessary surgery, had set in motion a cascade of revelations and recalibrations. My physical vulnerability had exposed emotional fault lines long ignored, had brought to the surface assumptions and expectations that had shaped our family dynamic for decades without conscious examination. The journey since then had not been easy for any of us. There had been uncomfortable truths acknowledged, difficult boundaries established, painful recognitions of where we had failed each other. But through that necessary discomfort, something new was emerging. Relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Connections founded on genuine interest rather than convenience. Support flowing from love rather than duty. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was changed from the one who had read Dr. Gonzalez's letter all those weeks ago. Not just physically, as my body healed from surgery, but in a more fundamental sense. There was a clarity in her gaze, a certainty, in her posture, a self-possession that came from having faced difficult truths and emerged stronger for the encounter. I had cooked and cleaned for my son's family for years. When I got sick, they had hired a nurse instead of helping. So I had changed my will, not as punishment, but as recognition of reality, as realignment of resources with demonstrated values. But the most significant change had not been to legal documents or material distributions. It had been to the unwritten rules of our family system, to the patterns of giving and receiving that defined our relationships, to the understanding of what we owed each other as human beings connected by both choice and circumstance. That transformation, still tentative, still evolving, but genuinely underway, was the true inheritance worth passing on. Not property or possessions or financial assets, but the example of honesty, of courage, of willingness to examine uncomfortable truths in service of more authentic connection. Outside my window, the spring moon illuminated my garden, where crocuses had pushed through winter soil to open their faces to the light. New growth emerging from dormancy, fragile but persistent, reaching toward possibility. A fitting metaphor, perhaps, for this season of family transformation. Changes tentative but determined, relationships reborn through necessary truth-telling, connections strengthened through the very challenges that might have broken them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.